Love podcasts, hate nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo! Happy belated St. Patrick's Day.
Happy day after St. Patrick's Day. I've still got the green. Still getting the green in. You can never not get the green in, no matter what day of the week. I have the orange today as well.
Oh, wow. Both sides, isn't
Yeah.
it?
I'm a both sideser in Irish politics. How are you, Laura?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
You don't seem convinced.
I don't seem convinced. There's so much going on. I spoke to two very interesting people yesterday about what we saw happen over the weekend, which was the fact that Donald Trump has been striking the Houthis in Yemen, but, well, there's 53 confirmed dead, including children and civilians. And these strikes on the Houthis are being done in retaliation to the fact that Houthis have been targeting US, UK and Israeli ships in the Gulf of Arabia. They've been striking them in retaliation or in support, or the Houthi support for Palestine. But there have been counterclaims over whether they're just targeting ships from that nation. It's the biggest military operation we've seen Donald Trump take part in since his return to office, which I thought was quite interesting because we've seen a lot of American politics and a lot of the Republicans are quite, well, we've seen this isolationist turn, haven't we? That they don't want to spend money funding the war in Ukraine. They don't want to spend money on other people's wars. Yet we see this attack in the name of Palestine.
It is speaking out both sides of one's mouth, isn't it? And it's also quite interesting that the Republican Party at large, like the party of the Iraq War, right, is now the party of America first, no expansionist policy, yada, yada, yada. But yet when it comes to people like the Houthis have been one that I think people, whether they are traditional leftists or pro-Palestine people, have been able to pin any sort of political ideology on, right? Where, like, yes, they have been targeting ships on the claim that they're trying to intervene in Israel's bombardment of Gaza. But there has also been some sections of the left that have been like, well, no, actually, they're attacking global trade and, like, globalist capitalism, yada, yada, yada. Which obviously there was a point, wasn't there, where a lot of trade had started to go around the Cape of Good Hope rather than going through the Suez Canal to try and avoid being attacked by the Houthis, which is quite a significant thing to do, right? But it's kind of been, there has been a break since the election last November, and now it's kind of re-upped itself again. And so who were you speaking to?
So I spoke to the former UK ambassador to Yemen and also a professor of international relations at LSE called Dr. Fawaz Gerges. And what was interesting about what Dr. Gerges had to say is that he was saying that these attacks are actually a threat to Iran. This is a bit of a proxy war. The Houthis are Iranian-backed, and this is America's way of saying, look what we're doing to the Houthis. You need to come to the table and negotiate with us about your nuclear armament. And what's really interesting about this proxy war and the fact that Trump has a call with Putin today is the fact that Iran and Russia have quite tight military cooperation, and that especially since the Ukraine war, Russia really relies on Iran for a lot of its weapons and military capabilities. So that's also at play. You have like these three kind of superpowers operating in this kind of semi-proxy war. But interestingly, Dr. Gerges also pointed out, because you mentioned there that this is strange that they're taking this isolationist turn and they're the party of Iraq. But actually, just American foreign policy always can seem to be boiled down to oil, which is what Dr. Gerges argues, that like the Iraq war was about oil. Every single foreign policy decision is just about...
It was about WMDs, no?
I thought it was about humanitarian protection.
Yeah, exactly. Oil? It couldn't have been.
But Yes, so he was saying it can all just be boiled down to that, and with these attacks on shipping, it's an attack on the flow of commerce and the flow of oil. And interestingly, he disagreed with the UK ambassador over what was the US's motivations in these strikes. So why don't we hear from the UK ambassador first, who had this to say about Trump's motivations?
Let's.
Trump, when he was justifying the strikes, referred to them as relentless assaults that have cost the US and world economy many billions of dollars. Can this all be boiled down to US trade interests?
I don't think it's just US trade interests. I mean, I think the way that the White House expressed that was very clear, and I think it was a message that people could readily understand, that we can't have this kind of interference with international trade and this kind of tax on the global economy, effectively, by putting one of the most important shipping lanes in the world out of commission. But I think it's more than that. I think the fundamental point is that the Houthis have thrown down the gauntlet to any idea of international rule of law. They've basically said, we reserve the right to interfere with legal civilian shipping whenever we think that it's necessary to make a point politically. And they have actually attacked ships, and those ships have not been Israeli ships. They've been a range of ships associated with a range of countries and a range of commercial interests. And so I think that even though the White House statement emphasizes the commercial dimension of the Houthi threat, I think it's also their threat to the rule of law.
On that point of the rule of law, I'm wondering, do you see a slight double standard here in that when the Houthis have violated international law, we see the US retaliate with force in the form of strikes, but we've witnessed Vladimir Putin horrifically violate international law and the US refusing to intervene on behalf of the Ukrainians, refusing to offer any form of security backstop?
Well, I think, I don't want to say too much on the Ukrainian side, because I'm not sure that the US position is clear yet. The US is clearly trying to figure out a way forward towards a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. But the messaging about the degree to which they would back Russia or back Ukraine, I think, has been unclear. And there have been some signs that the White House is prepared to put more pressure on Russia if it considers that Russia is acting as a spoiler and not showing sufficient interest in pursuing a realistic peace process. So I think it's, clearly you have two very different challenges here. You have one, in the case of the Houthis, that is susceptible to being addressed by direct military power. And the Russia-Ukraine war is a much bigger and much more complicated conflict. And the United States doesn't actually have the ability, or at least I don't think most of the world would want to see the United States try to get directly involved in that. So I think, I don't really like the term double standards, because I think each conflict is different, and people, I think, rightly apply different standards according to what is realistic.
That was Edmund Wittenbrown saying that Trump is being motivated by his desire to enforce international law. Mm-hmm. And I did push back and say, well, isn't that a bit of a double standard? Yeah. Because he's not interested in making sure that international law is being enforced in regards to Ukraine, and in regards to Israel and Gaza, for that matter. And here's what Dr. Fawaz Gurges had to say when I put that point about international law to him.
Really, what the Russian-American relationship under President Trump represents a sea change. You really have, this is a transformative moment. The United States now is closer to Russia than its former traditional European allies, particularly the Ukraine. And this tells you about the sea change that Donald Trump has really ushered in American foreign policy. And that's why America's traditional European allies are extremely concerned and extremely anxious that the closeness of Russia's relation with Donald Trump could have major implications on global security and the nature of the international system.
You've spoken about how these strikes are sort of a proxy to get Iran to come to the table to negotiate over its nuclear power. But your new book, What Really Went Wrong, The West and the Failure of Democracy in the Middle East, explores how US foreign policy in the region has largely been determined by which path best allows uninterrupted flows of oil. Is that at play behind Trump's decisions that he's taken over this weekend to strike the Houthis?
Well, I mean, if you read President Trump's tweets, he made it very clear the reason why he's opening a new front against Yemen, it's because of shipping lanes. He said, we lost billions of dollars. We want to make sure that the shipping lanes are open. We want to make sure that trade and oil and energy pass by the Red Sea. So for President Trump, it's all about the money. You follow the trail of money. It's about trade. He said, we lost billions of dollars. So really, in a way, Donald Trump is one of the few American presidents who is very blunt, who's very direct. He says, yeah, it's all about energy. It's all about money. And that's why we are going to bomb the Houthis till eternity, unless they stop their bombings of the Red Sea and the shipping. So this is really classical American foreign policy. Energy and oil are the most important assets and key drivers behind American foreign policy from the 1950s up till the present.
So that was Dr. Fawaz Gurges saying that Trump is motivated by the US's commercial interests and their desire to get Iran to come to the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because we're seeing this is the whole new era of American diplomacy, if you can even call it that. I think what's interesting is we did see some interesting, would you call it soft power? I'm not sure, with the meeting between Trump and McGregor.
Jesus. Soft power from who? Like,
well, I guess you have Trump pulling this image of what he thinks Irish America and masculinity is, and he's kind of using McGregor to embody that image by inviting him to the White House.
I can't speak for the American right. I can speak for what Irish people think of Conor McGregor. I think if I was to hazard a guess at Trump's motivations of having him in, might be something as base as I mentioned him the other day when I was talking to Micheál Martin, so it would be good to invite him in on Paddy's Day. I think there is an aspect of it that is tied in with the kind of the manosphere strategy that he had in the election campaign that someone like Conor McGregor leans into quite a bit. I think, could Conor McGregor be someone that Irish America sees as a good role model? Possibly. From what I understand of Irish America, now look, I'm sure there are some fantastic Irish Americans out there, but Irish America is not Ireland, and it's not the culture and ideals and shared values of Irish people is not necessarily reflected by Irish America. What do I mean by that? By and large, Irish people tend to be more socially liberal than Irish Americans do, less religiously motivated than Irish Americans are. And yeah, I think to have someone like Conor McGregor in the White House is, I was thinking about it this morning and I'm trying to just fall down on it being, we're owning the libs by having this man who is liable for rape in a civil trial in the White House speaking for Ireland. Like, I know for certain he doesn't speak for me. He doesn't speak for my mates. He doesn't speak for anyone that I know or anyone that I would consider myself tertiary connected to. Like, he is someone that had the chance to be a fantastic role model and fantastic poster boy for what Ireland was, and squandered it. whether it's even outside of the case in November, it's things like punching a man in a bar because he wouldn't drink your shit whiskey. It's being arrested and fined for throwing railings and chairs at a bus that had like the guy that you were meant to be fighting on it. It's everything like that you look at this person that 10, 15 years ago, particularly working class boys in Ireland, looked at as, oh my God, this is somebody that speaks to me, that is of my world, that is showing something positive about where I'm from and what I am. And to then you go through the next 15 years of your career just destroying any hope that anybody from those communities, like Irish people as a whole, but particularly working class boys, to kind of just you betrayed the trust of those people. And so when it comes to him visiting the White House, it's nothing more than just showing yourself as somebody who endorses the activities of a thug, is essentially what he is. And so the short answer to your question, I don't think it's soft power whatsoever. I think it's a mix of provocation and just general lack of awareness and lack of sensibility for what Irish people stand for. And I could be wrong about Irish America as well. I'm more than happy to be corrected, and I would believe that I am wrong by and large, that Irish Americans don't stand for the things that he stands for as well.
It's interesting because I think there is like a split in Irish American voting traditions, because I guess you have like the Philadelphia, like you had the strong union movement amongst Irish American voters in Philadelphia, but then you also have this extremely Catholic, almost to like an evangelical point of an Irish American voter bloc that was incredibly important to getting Trump elected. So there definitely is a divide within like the Irish American voting community. But it's interesting when we look at who Donald Trump is inviting to the White House, aligning himself with. I mean, Trump himself found civilly liable of sexual abuse in a civil court as well, and his connection with Andrew Tate, getting him removed or getting him allowed to leave Romania. And now with Conor McGregor, it shows who he's aligning himself with. And it's interesting because Conor McGregor was using his platform at the White House to rail against how illegal immigration has ruined Ireland. And it's interesting because often they are just grifters. Like at the end of the day, Trump, Tate, and Conor McGregor, they're far-right grifters. And Conor McGregor was investigated with incitement over the Dublin riots in 2023. And it's interesting because they always invoke in the far right this like femno-nationalism, where they're saying that the reason we can't have immigration to this country, legal or otherwise, is because these men, these others, are a threat to our women, a sexual threat to our women. The biggest irony of all is that they themselves are found through the judicial process to be massive threats to women. But it's like this cognitive dissonance within the movement.
Yeah, I mean, with Tate, he's obviously been pulled over there to kind of remain there for the time being, at least. Would not be the worst idea that Donald Trump has ever had to keep Conor McGregor over there, so he doesn't like. I don't know. He just makes my skin crawl, and like it's. Yeah, I guess it's the same with Tate. It's the same with his brother. It's the same with everybody in that kind of sphere. Is that their biggest grift is the thing that they have identified with politically is the biggest paradox of themselves. That like as you say, we need to protect our women and children from these strange men. The biggest danger to those people has been people like you.
It's very much like look over there politics. It's like, don't look at me, look over there. Like they're the ones that are the threat, not me.
I haven't even like, I don't want it to make it the Conor McGregor show, but like that guy, outside of things like outside of his grift and outside of his being investigated for encouraging in some way the Dublin riots. He's a massive landlord. You know, he's like, for the last however many years, there's been intermittent stories in Irish media of him buying up retail properties in Dublin, hiking the rent, people who have had like hairdressers, salons, dry cleaners, this kind of thing in communities for decades, if not generations. From one day to the next, their business is gone because a guy who claims to be the working class community hero has decided that he's going to start milking them for all they're worth. It's outside of that as well. He's building luxury flats everywhere around the city. Yes, he's building social housing as well because it's a legal requirement now in Ireland to do that. And so it's funny, the dissonance with his supporters of like, oh, I haven't agreed with anything he said, but when it comes to what he said in the White House yesterday, he's got a point. He hasn't got a point. His point is to distract you from the fact that he is one of the richest people in the country that is trying his best to avoid any liability for any of the things that are making anybody from precarious backgrounds in Ireland miserable. So it is all a distraction. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same with Tate and anyone else involved in that movement.
Wow, I didn't know that. But he's like fueling the housing crisis with one hand and then blaming.
Fueling might be like, I mean, there's a lot. Bigger
rent
players.
hiking. Yeah,
there are far bigger players in it, but particularly when it comes to say like it's been quite an interesting contrast between what he allegedly stood for when he was seen favorably to what he's ended up being. And yeah. He's just, we don't need to get into like hyper local politics because there's then other things with his pub and things with his beer, his whiskey that are just like, if I said to you, my dad knows so-and-so that works for so-and-so, and all this kind of thing gets into it as well. It's just like he's surrounded by just, he is a seedy character and he attracts seedy characters as well. And none of it sits well with anybody.
That's so interesting because he's kind of, I guess actually within the manosphere and within those spheres generally, there is like a heralding and like admiration for anyone who is a self-styled entrepreneur, regardless of whether in becoming an entrepreneur they screwed over people or they grifted or the product they were selling wasn't actually really much of a product. And like that's why people like Trump, because he can frame himself as this, I'm this self-made entrepreneur. And McGregor is now styling himself as a businessman entrepreneur, and it's all part of like the hustle culture kind of rise and grind.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's the hyper individualism of it. You know, it doesn't matter about like because these people are products of the community in the best senses of them. Not saying that there are many good things about people like McGregor or Tate, but things like community, things like belonging, things like looking out for one another are the things that bring people up and elevate people. And then you reach a point where you decide, no, it is now about me, and I'm going to teach people how to do over and ruin their communities or their relationships or things like that because it's about me and looking out for me, and teaching young men to do the exact same thing rather than having a connection to the people that they live with or the connection to the community that they're from. It's the complete opposite.
It's interesting because Micheál Martin echoed the points you've made about Conor McGregor not representing Irish people, because for all intents and purposes,
so did Leo Varadkar, yeah.
Well, yeah, for all intents and purposes, like Conor McGregor was invited to the White House for St. Patrick's Day because in this press conference that Trump did with Micheál Martin, he was asked, "Who's your favorite Irish person?" And Trump said Conor McGregor because I like his tattoos. Yeah, which interesting reason.
Pick literally anybody else. Like you pick the one person that nobody wants you to say. And
so that, I guess that's kind of how we ended up with the situation. But like I said, Micheál Martin took to Twitter to disavow the fact that Conor McGregor was not speaking for, or that Conor McGregor was speaking for the Irish population.
There has been a lot of because with Micheál Martin, with Leo Varadkar, with Simon Harris, there's been a lot of heartbreaking. Worst person you know makes makes a great point about that whole thing. But yeah, I think it's the one thing, and our colleagues in Dublin on Joe.ie did a very good post about it this morning of the one thing that unifies Irish people more than anything else is their hatred for Conor McGregor. And it's on, and what a day to have done it than St. Patrick's Day. What a better day, you know. But enough about Ireland. We're talking so much about Ireland.
That was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah.
Shall we
liked it.
Leave a comment if you did. Shall we move on to British politics?
Yeah, let's do that then.
So, Liz Kendall, DWP Minister, will present her Green Paper on welfare reform today in Parliament. These reforms are to help cut the Health and Disability Benefits Bill, which is set to increase from 65 billion a year to 75 billion a year by 2030, with half of that spending on PIP. Would you like to run through it?
Yeah, so what is likely to be in the Green Paper is an introduction of a right to try work scheme. So that would be for people who are on incapacity benefits and they can try and get back to work without the risk of losing their benefits. Commitments to raising the basic rate of universal credit, lessening of the number of reassessments those with the most severe conditions have to go through to keep their personal independence payments.
I mean, we would say that like those are probably the things that people are most likely to be happy about coming from this Green Paper. These are probably the reforms that people would like to see.
Yeah.
I mean, a commitment to raising the basic rate of universal credit is expected. That we have one of the lowest basic unemployment rates in unemployment benefit rates in Europe. So that would be helping to raise us more in line with them. And a lessening number of reassessments as well is probably something that a lot of people would quite like to see. What are some of the things, well, they've been trailed over the weekend, but some of the things that we can expect to see as well that people might not be so happy about?
Well, it's the roughly 5 billion cut to PIP in the first place, isn't it? The Times today, or was that yesterday? Today, reiterated that it will see claimants needing to demonstrate that they have greater difficulty with everyday activities such as washing, eating and dressing. This kind of thing, well, we'll go on to the rest of it before we go back to it, but I think like the necropolitics of stuff like that is just terrifying. Like, how do you go about means testing somebody to prove that they have a less than what is considered normal capability to dress themselves or clean themselves? It's so dehumanizing, so Orwellian. I don't want to be lazy and say Orwellian, but I said Orwellian.
I think
it's insane.
I mean, some of the stuff we've seen trailed about how these PIP assessments will change seems completely arbitrary. One of the things that I've seen trailed is that if you can wash your upper body, if you need help to wash your upper body, that would qualify you for PIP. But if you need help to wash your lower body, that wouldn't qualify you for PIP. The most like arbitrary decision on what makes someone capable or incapable for work.
We all need help washing our upper body though, don't we? Like nobody can reach their back properly. So it is completely arbitrary, but you can't qualifying people for benefits in that way is just I can't think of a world where you would need to put that in to prove that there's a fundamental problem with benefits. You don't need to to go back to what I was saying, it's just the dehumanizing of people to such an extent to have to to give them some sort of physical capability test to that extent of, and again, how are you to prove that somebody can wash their upper or lower body? Is there going to be somebody from the DWP in your house watching you
Liz
shower?
Kendall, yeah.
Like Liz Kendall's in the shower with you, watching you wash yourself for a week straight, so that you make sure that you're actually entitled to it.
And as many people with like chronic or chronic illnesses that flare up, or people with mental health conditions will point out, is these things aren't always static. Some things that you are able to do one week, you're not able to do during a flare up. So how will that be taken into account during PIP assessments? And I think one of the things that's been perhaps particularly interesting about the way that this stuff has been trailed during interviews over the weekend has been a lot of the language around this. I mean, you have the Get Britain Working Group, which is a group of Labour MPs who have said that Labour have a moral duty to reform welfare, irrespective of if it saves money. And I think bringing the idea of morality, it's just interesting. It's like they're referring to some sort of like almost Victorian Protestant British work ethic, where the idea that if you're out of work, you're somehow lazy and immoral, even though the people we're talking about are neither of those things. They're chronically ill, they have disabilities, they have serious mental health issues, and we're bringing in at the same time this language of morality around it.
But it is also like, if you're extending it backwards, if that's a phrase, the Conservatives rightly got a lot of stick couple of months before the election when they were proposing very, very, very similar cuts to disability payments to encourage people to get back into work. And the opposition to this is present, absolutely present, but there's so few Labour MPs and cabinet ministers that are willing to put their head above the parapet and say, not sure we should be doing this, guys. Like, you have names that you would expect, like Angela Rayner and Ed Miliband, but you've also got people like Yvette Cooper and to a lesser extent David Lammy that have reportedly been unsure about the way that the government is going with these cuts. I think, like, it doesn't take that too much consideration to say, yeah, they're well within their thinking to say, I don't think we should be aligning ourselves with this sort of policy. You were the party that's less than a year ago was slating the Conservatives for doing not as developed a plan as this. Like, this is far more developed than what Rishi Sunak wanted to put in a year ago. But now you're going, right, we'll take, yeah, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea. We can go further on these things. But also, like, what I found interesting last week, it was last week or the week before, the line that everyone was going out with was, well, we are the Labour Party. You know, so, you know, the party of work, that means that we shouldn't actually be looking after people that can't work. That's not totally what being the Labour Party is. It's to everybody their own capabilities.
Exactly.
It is not everyone works no matter whether you're capable or not.
Exactly.
Or else Liz Kendall's going to be in the shower with you.
It's interesting because we've heard these leaks, these briefings that cabinet ministers are unhappy, specifically over the freeze to PIP, because PIP is one of a benefit that rises with inflation, and the thing that's been trailed is that they were possibly going to freeze that inflationary rise, but now it no longer looks like they will be. But it's interesting because we heard these leaks, but that Starmer felt confident enough that there wouldn't be some sort of larger backlash or mass resignation from cabinet. I mean, we saw Annalise Dodds, who was the International Development Minister, resign over the change to the foreign aid budget. And in that resignation, she said she was disappointed that the government hadn't considered changing fiscal rules or approaches to taxation, which, again, if Labour are looking to save $6 billion, those are still options that they have, but instead they're looking to cut welfare spending. And it's interesting because Ava raised the point yesterday on the podcast that perhaps Labour were actually never going to cut PIP spending. This was a way to get through other reforms while putting all the attention on PIP, and then they wouldn't actually do it and it would not be as bad. I think one Labour backbencher called it a bleeding stump strategy, which interesting phrasing. Yeah, that was from Politico. And that is
that's a real getting the ship shape kind of analogy.
Like, I think that sort of strategy doesn't take into any consideration how it would feel to be a person who relies on PIP, and you've heard all weekend that Labour are going to take away your lifeline. Even if today they don't, they've had no consideration. The damage is done.
Yeah.
The damage is done.
It's when you look at the bigger picture with that, you think that, and like, look, as we said, there are things in this that are things that people would look to and say, these are good policies. If the cuts don't come, or if the cuts are lesser than what were trailed initially, the people who you've already been struggling to keep on side since June, July last year are moving further and further away from you. And you've only got 1 month now until the local elections. People don't forget how you made them feel, you know? And so, as we're just saying, the politics of it is horrible. The politics is, even if it's a case of just testing the waters to see what the public reception would be to it, maybe if it was a little bit softer, maybe they would have cut PIP to a larger extent than they did, or they're planning to do. But I mean, and not to be like the Ava of the show today, but like, Reform have been mopping up people in precarious situations across the UK that would have traditionally been voting for Labour, would have traditionally felt ideologically and politically at home in the Labour movement. But when you've got a government party such as this that are so willing to test your patience and test your resolve for the sake of nothing, for the sake of, well, we made the political decision to not do that. How about just not thinking about doing it in the first place, or not trailing doing it in the first place? You would save yourself from the aggro of then having attacks from the right of, well, it's in things like this, it's less of an attack from the right, but ideologically, obviously, Reform are on the right of Labour. You will be avoiding attacks. Like, I wouldn't be surprised tomorrow if you've got Tice or Farage standing up to say, how do you think you've made the British public feel that you were gonna cut their benefits? And they're not gonna say, and you didn't in the end, you know? And that's gonna be the thing that people are gonna see far and wide, or people are gonna hear from Nigel Farage for the next couple of days after that. And so more and more, you're just pushing people into the arms of the quote unquote anti-establishment parties that don't have their best interests at heart in the long run, but are willing to mop up the inconsistencies from the government party in the immediate future.
It's interesting though, because I do think there will be people with whom this tough on welfare language actually plays very well with.
But they're not traditional Labour people, you know, like cutting benefits and cutting like there's scroungers everywhere. Like that isn't true solidarity.
No,
you know?
But I guess it kind of, this whole like rhetoric of like the deserving poor and the undeserving poor that like is very much from the 2010s like benefit street era. Yeah. Like I was talking with a spad to one of the Redwall Labour constituency MPs, and she was telling me about how it's a Labour constituency, they voted Labour, but you know how Labour are reintroducing, they're not ASBOs, they've got a new name now.
Yes.
But they are ASBOs. And that has gone down a storm. They love that policy, and maybe, I guess, from London, we might look at that and say this is like the demonisation of the working class. It's this like anti-Chav rhetoric that Owen Jones wrote about. But in that constituency, a Labour constituency where Reform are very closely polling behind, that's gone down a storm and actually incredibly popular.
Yeah. The only pushback I'd give is that a Labour spad told you that.
Yes.
Look, I've no doubt, and I like absolutely there does exist that anti-benefit, anti-social youth sentiment across the country in communities ranging from affluent to not so affluent. But I think there are so many better policies that you could be going for, so many better savings, so many more popular savings that you could be making than trying to get DWP civil servants into people's showers.
Yeah. I think kind of just before we wrap up, I think it's interesting that it feels to me this is short-termism again. You look at what austerity did during the Osborne Cameron years. And also, remember George Osborne was booed during the Paralympics when he appeared to hand out a medal. And he was booed by the crowd for the impact that the austerity cuts were having on people with disabilities. And George Osborne didn't even cut or didn't enact the PIP cuts that he had proposed because of the backlash to them. And now he's on his podcast with Ed Balls saying, oh, isn't this PIP cut terrible? And I think if you look at what austerity did to this country, which is 190,000 excess deaths as a result of austerity, it resulted in an increased debt to GDP ratio because austerity is, surprise, really bad for economic growth because you are creating an impoverished and an unwell workforce.
Yep. Oh, it's all so depressing, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, on that note.
It's quite a heavy episode today, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we'll try.
Ed, Ollie, and Ava will be back tomorrow.
Yeah. You don't have to deal with us tomorrow either. Yeah, with, I'd imagine, a lighter episode because they'll be reacting to PMQs, won't they?
Yeah, a lot to talk about in PMQs, though.
A lot to talk about. But they have fun doing it, don't they? God bless them.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.